Welcome to Go Green Radio, everybody. So glad that you could join us. We have a great show for you today. We have two researchers from the Boston University School of Public Health who have been studying 5 U.S. school districts from different parts of the country who were early adopters in installing a wide variety of indoor air quality monitors. And this study is a first ever, not just in the nation, but in the world, of this kind of deployment of indoor air quality monitors in schools. And the study reveals some very important challenges, some successes, some barriers, things that other school districts can learn from these 5 pioneers. Our guests today are Dr. Pilar Botana and Dr. Patricia Fabienne, and I'm so excited to welcome you guys to Go Green Radio, ladies. It's wonderful to have you.
Thank you, Jill. It's great to be here.
We will start with Dr. Botana. Your new paper is the result of a study you conducted on, as I mentioned, 5 school districts that were early adopters of placing indoor environmental quality or indoor air quality monitors throughout their campuses. Tell us a little bit about the school districts that were involved in the study and some of the similarities and differences in their approaches to using these monitors.
Sure. So the public school districts that participated in this study are Boston Public Schools in Massachusetts, Denver in Colorado, Montgomery County, Maryland, Clark County in Nevada, and Prince William County in Virginia. In terms of similarities, they are all really large districts, and they have installed a significant amount of environmental sensors inside the schools. But of course, in terms of differences, they are in different climate zones, and there is diversity in size. While they are all large, Boston, for example, has around 50,000 students, while I think the largest is Clark County with 300,000 students. And they also have different approaches to how much monitoring coverage they have in the school. So some of the schools like Boston and Montgomery County have 100% of classroom covered by sensors, while for other schools is less, maybe like up to 10% of school coverage. So in these cases, the monitors usually are moved around. And then there is also the difference in how they are making the data available to people. So some schools chose to share the data publicly and at the classroom level, while others do it, they don't share it, or they share it but aggregate it at the school level. So I think these are the key differences between the school districts. Happy to expand.
Well, and we're going to dig into some of those similarities and differences in some of the following questions, but that gives us a good overview. I mean, you're really studying school districts that took different approaches, and I think that's illuminating, and we'll dig into some of your findings. Dr. Fabienne, was it primarily the pandemic that prompted these school districts to install environmental quality monitors, or were there other drivers?
Thanks, Jill. And again, thank you for the invitation for being here. And just thank you for everybody who's listening about this and interested in improving environments in schools. It's been like a really exciting work that we've done. To answer your question about what the driver was, definitely the pandemic exacerbated or sort of the implementation of a lot of sensors. Schools have been monitoring indoor air quality for a very long time. But the pandemic and the school closures that happened because of the pandemic really pushed schools to install sensors to have a safe return to schools. So there was pressure from teachers and parents, different school districts from different groups. Why? Because we know that when students miss school, they, there's learning suffers that has impacts, lifelong impacts on sort of economic earning power, parents wanting to go back to work and having kids at home. And the driver specifically for like which sensors was really measuring carbon dioxide. And the reason for that tied to the pandemic is because carbon dioxide is what we all breathe out every day, anybody who is alive. And so it's an indicator of breath. And as an indicator of breath, it's an indicator of potential virus particles that could be in breath and infect people. It could be COVID, that was the pandemic concern, but also things like flu and human rhinovirus, which is common cold. So CO2 was really, sort of the pollutant driving the sensor installation. Once you install sensors, it's super easy to add a lot of other things. So schools took the opportunity and then also started monitoring temperature, air pollution, volatile organic compounds, and other things.
Follow on to that, Dr. Fabienne. Do you think that going forward, it will be the spread of infectious disease that's the primary driver for maybe expanding indoor air quality monitoring in schools? Or do you think there will be a shift toward student health and learning as a reason to invest in monitors?
Yeah, great question. I think that although the initial push for indoor air quality monitoring was infectious disease transmission, there's a lot of shifts that have happened. Um, I think seasonally we will continue to be concerned about infectious disease, like in the September when you have the big spike of common cold and asthma exacerbations, flu season, etc. But I do see that now schools are starting to use the monitors for other things. For example, climate resilience planning or thinking about extreme weather, extreme heat, which closes schools as well. Having monitoring that tells you which wings of a school you can use, which classrooms you should shut down. Are you hitting thresholds, that are dangerous for learning? That's one shift. Things around wildfire smoke, also extreme weather related, of saying, is the air clean enough for kids to be here learning? Do we need to install filters, do other types of actions? So definitely kind of a shift into climate resilience work, I would say. And student health and learning is the reason for these concerns, right? We worry about wildfire smoke because of asthma. But I will say that I think that there is still a disconnect in people's minds on how indoor environmental quality impacts health and learning because there's so many things in indoor air and there's so many health impacts. And learning isn't really health in the way that sort of we think of health as defined. And so I think there's a lot of work for us to do to make those connections better.
Agreed. And, my nonprofit organization, the Go Green Initiative, is the recipient of an EPA grant working on this very issue to help improve indoor air quality in schools throughout the US. And we have to have sort of multi-layer messaging for community engagement in the local communities where we're working, but also with the school district administration and school board members who ultimately make the decision on budgeting for these types of programs. Dr. Fabienne, Boston Public Schools is unique in that they placed monitors in every classroom and made that data visible to the public at the classroom level. I mean, not just parents, anyone in the world can get on their website and see that classroom level data. Help us understand how your team at Boston University helped Boston Public Schools take all of that data and make it actionable. Why was their partnership with a research team so important?
Yeah. Thank you for that question. And I'll add one more thing actually about the previous one as we focused on students, but I will point out that teachers are a huge workforce in the country and in the world. And when we talk about student health, we're also talking about teachers and staff, school staff. So side note for the previous question. The partnership. The partnership between Boston Public Schools, led by Catherine Walsh, who is currently the Director of Planning, Engineering, Sustainability, and Environment, indoor air quality leader that we all know, and Boston University was pretty critical to expand the utility of the real-time monitoring. So as you point out, the sensors were installed by the schools. There's a website where you can go and look right now into any given classroom. And that real-time data is used by the schools team on a daily basis for a lot of different activities. Our piece of it and kind of that collaboration has to do more with kind of beyond the real-time use of the data. And I would say there's sort of four buckets where the value of this partnership came in. The first one is having technical resources to handle and analyze such a large volume of data, so pure data logistics. So to give you a sense of scale, in the last 5 years, the Boston Public School sensor network has collected about 8 billion data measurements. And that needs big computers with parallel processing capacity to even be able to query. If you were to say, oh, what was the concentration 3 years ago? You need these big computers that can sift through 8 billion data points and sort of find that information. Universities have those resources. They're there for researchers to use and to collaborate with others. So that sort of technology piece. The second piece, I would say, is analysis expertise and tools. So things like machine learning, artificial intelligence, statistics, geographic information systems, everything that let us connect the data sets, clean the data, and decide what are values that we can use, that we can't use, are there sensors that are failing, connect it to building information, to weather information, because the sensors only measure under environmental quality. If you want to really say something about a classroom, you have to connect it to the building information for that specific classroom. If you want to say something about the ventilation system, you have to connect that data set as well. And so these kind of more data analytics and analyses and stats tools, that's like bucket number two. Bucket number three is more the environmental health and building science knowledge that comes to be able to say things about ventilation and calculate ventilation rates. Do the environmental health literacy that we'll talk about a little bit later, connecting ventilation, carbon dioxide, PM 2.5 to health and learning. That is something where there's many people in schools that know how these things connect. As you point out, a lot of your efforts are about that. There's a lot of gaps. And so again, at the university, that is part of our, I've been doing indoor air quality work for 20 years. So our bread and butter. And then the fourth one, really important, I think, for universities worldwide, is that we have amazing students and researchers. And this project was launched with pilot funding and lots of volunteer hours. Again, sort of that's something that only universities have, not companies or other places. And so I think that combination of resources, knowledge, with the amazing system that Boston Public Schools had set up and the interest and willingness to collaborate from their team, that sort of is what turned this collaboration into what it is.
I know I'm going to get this question, so I'm going to ask you, Dr. Fabian, for school districts that may have a research university in their locale, they may be thinking, oh, great, we've got to do what Boston Public Schools did. But let me ask you this, is it reasonable to consider the type of university partnership that you're describing as a long-term data analysis solution?
I think yes for many, probably not for all.
Mm-hmm.
I will also say, I mean, universities in general want to partner with their local organizations and certainly public health, having that expertise. So it's kind of this match of location, expertise, and resources. I will also say, and COVID helped us learn this, we can work with partners all over the world. And so
True.
it doesn't necessarily mean that if you're a school district in one part of the country that you can't work with a research team like us or another team that's working in another region. So yes, there's potential for long term. Does it work for every school district? Probably not. And then keeping in mind that we're trying to do this in a shared resources way. The work you do, EPA does, American Lung Association, all these Center for Green Schools, all these different groups. The idea is, okay, can we share across so you don't actually have to have such a big partnership? I acknowledge that what we have is a huge thing with lots of resources. Not necessarily, not everybody needs that, and you can still benefit.
Dr. Botana, I'd love for you to talk to us about how the participants in this study, their perceptions of how indoor environmental quality can impact school occupants and what their perceptions reveal about the need for training.
Yes, yes. Yes, so I have good news, and that's that I saw that participants really get it. We talked to school staff in operation roles, in student health roles, and also educators, and they get it. They know that poor classroom conditions lead to reduced learning and negative impact for occupants' health. And they gave me a specific example. So they were telling me that they say that uncomfortable or unhealthy conditions could reduce students' focus, the attention, the concentration, or the creativity, which is true. And they also describe health problems linked to poor indoor environmental quality. They were discussing respiratory problems such as asthma or headaches. I think that is very important that they also were noting that when students miss school because they are sick, this can further affect their learning. And so they also pointed out to the fact that some students may be more sensitive to classroom conditions. So they're thinking about susceptibilities and vulnerabilities, which is great. And they discussed that students with asthma or neurodiverse students, or even that younger children are especially affected by heat. But I think that what I hear is that these participants believe that most teachers in the school lack the understanding, on what to do to keep environmental conditions in your classrooms fine, and so they engage in activities that may impact classroom air quality. This could be just having a lot of clutter in the classrooms or the use of air fresheners. And they also seem to lack understanding on how building systems work, which they makes total sense because they are not trained on these topics. They are trained in educating our children. But this led to situations where teachers were, for example, blocking a vent, which doesn't allow to get as much fresh air, or maybe they were trying to trigger the temperature change in the classroom by having an ice cubes near air quality monitor, which will not work. It sounds logic, but won't work, and that is going to lead to teachers' frustration. So for that reason, we are actually working on a parallel project, co-designing a communications campaign for teachers specifically. The goal is to increase teacher knowledge of approaches to improve classroom environmental conditions. And frankly, it was sparked by the conversations that we have during this study.
I love it.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of potential there. And I'll give you time to finish that thought. We've got to take a quick commercial break, but when we come back, we have much more. So don't go away, folks. There's more Go Green Radio right after this. Welcome back to Go Green Radio. So glad to have you all with us today. Our guests today are two superstar researchers from the Boston University School of Public Health, and they have just published a recent paper studying some school districts in different parts of the U.S. who were early adopters of widespread indoor environmental quality monitors. And we've been talking about some of their findings. We're going to keep digging deeper into it. Dr. Botana, there's a sentence in your study that says a participant with an environmental role suggested that EH, or environmental health trainings, should start at the top with heads of schools and principals. Talk to us about environmental health literacy among respondents in your study and why it would be valuable to increase EH literacy among a wide range of school district employees.
Yes, I really, really appreciated that quote. And to me, it makes so much sense because I think that participants in buildings operations felt that the school leaders are the decision makers. And if they don't have enough understanding on the importance of having good environmental quality in classrooms, that means that this is not going to be prioritized. So for that reason, for them, it makes sense that the training or sending that message should start at the school leaders, including heads or heads of schools, principals, anyone that is making a decision about the school upgrades. And so, on the other hand, I think that one of the topics we hear so much is work overload. So we realize, everybody realize that increasing environmental health literacy for everyone is important, for teachers, for the community, for the students. However, it seems like everybody is overloaded. So how do you deliver that information, and being able to deliver it when they need it? That's tricky, but that's key to improve this situation.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I feel like starting at the top will be a good starting point in thinking through strategies to find the right time and the right information for the different populations will work.
And I feel like I've been in this space for almost 25 years, and I feel like there are two things that we need to be doing simultaneously. The first is providing that environmental health literacy to existing education communities, but I think we need to be training future educators and future education leaders. And this is my PS that I give every so often to all the colleges of education out there. Please include this in your curriculum for educators and in your educational leadership certificates or degree programs, because at some point we have got to turn the tide. And I think if we can do both of these things sooner rather than later, we can help children who are in those classrooms today and ensure that children that are in those classrooms in the future are also the beneficiaries of this greater environmental health literacy. So that's my plug for the day. Dr. Botana, there are a lot of organizations out there, some who have grants, some that maybe, parent organizations that are doing this on a volunteer basis, but they're trying to work with school districts and schools on indoor air quality, and they don't know who has the power to affect change. What did your survey results show regarding who felt that they had the ability to influence indoor environmental quality and who did not?
Yeah. So, we asked exactly this question to all our participants, and what we hear is that I guess that it was a pretty technical answer that school staff members in building operation roles have a good ability to influence air quality by making adjustments to mechanical ventilations, heating and air conditioning. But this only happens for newer school buildings with systems that could be centrally managed and that have parameters that you can adjust by demand. Then for other school buildings that rely on boilers and radiators to temper the space, they really cannot do much. And for example, to adjust temperature, all they can really do is to ask teachers to open doors and windows or operate the window AC units. So yeah, that's a problem. And then we hear from educators and school occupants in general that they felt they didn't have much control over air quality other than adjusting thermostats. However, as I was saying before, I think that they have more control that they think they have, or they have more opportunities to influence air quality that they think. If they engage in good practices, just removing clutter or not using air fresheners, using air purifiers when available. But I think that, as I was saying before, probably the key way to act on indoor environmental quality is to take the decision of doing upgrades for the buildings and getting the funding, of course. So, yeah.
Yep, absolutely. Dr. Fabienne, over to you. Based on the information that Dr. Botana just shared, what advice do you have for organizations with grant money to improve IAQ in schools? For instance, if an organization is on a tight deadline because their grant only lasts so long, and their strategy was to get into schools by starting with school nurses or teachers, is that likely to be the best approach? And tell us why or why not.
Yeah, thank you. I would be hesitant to say that there's a single approach. And I think that everything we've been talking about so far speaks to the complexity of schools, the different needs that they have, the different resources that they have. And I think in a way that then is an opportunity because it means that there's multiple entry points. So I'm not going to sort of endorse one versus another. This indoor air quality monitoring obviously is like one way to sort of say, okay, this is an attractive thing that a school might want, and is one way to optimize resources, important planning, investments, etc. But there's also working with staff who might be interested in developing indoor air quality management plans, and that would be operations staff. There's education for leaders, and that might be partnering with a local more education organization, whether it's into the STEM curriculum or into the professional development that a lot of teachers, nurses, superintendents, etc. have to do. And then there's really creative ways to work. The Metropolitan Area Planning Council here in Massachusetts partnered with, I think it's the Holyoke District, and they gave stipends to school nurses and then senior operations staff or building operations staff and paired them up to do these walkthroughs of buildings. And so the nurse was an expert in student health and the staff person was an expert in building health. And they sort of did these walkthroughs through the schools and found so many ways to improve things that would improve indoor air quality and health. And they both kind of learned from each other's job. This was a pilot. It was stipends for people who wanted to participate. So you can think about like really creative ways and entry points that aren't a single way.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And there are many ways to do that. And it really depends on, if the individual that you go to is willing to go to a school board meeting and say, please include this in your budget.
Right.
Let's discuss, Dr. Fabienne, the 6 key concepts that surfaced from the analysis of the interviews that you did. Tell us about some of the innovative uses of the data that was taken from these IEQ monitors.
Yeah, so I will say people were super creative. I know you said 6, I found like 10. I'll just talk about a few of them. One was from operations staff saying that they could use these indoor air quality sensors to check concerns that people would call in without having to physically go visit a school. The school district, for example, in Boston is pretty large, it's 125 schools. So having this window into the classroom to say, oh, there might be a complaint about X or Y, let's look at the dashboard and see if we can kind of say, like, is this real? In what direction? What is exactly happening? Sort of that's one thing. They also reported, the same group, simplifying environmental audits. And some of those are required. I could have like an annual audit, sometimes every 3 years, 5 years, different types of audits. It simplifies it to have sensors that are there and a dashboard where you can look things up. Climate preparedness, which we talked about a little bit before, they're like, it's great. We can use this for thinking about wildfire smoke and what to do and our interventions for this working. Similar for mold. Can we use this relative humidity and temperature data to predict if a classroom could be getting moldy and then proactively, before it gets moldy, go and do something about it, whether it's find the leak, put in a dehumidifier or increase ventilation. There were comments about vendor accountability. There's a lot of money spent in HVAC systems, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. And then there's a trust that it's working the way that it should. And sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't for lots of different reasons. But this also sort of helped say, hey, it doesn't look like the ventilation is quite right. Look at these CO2 values. And then that if you have data, then you can very quickly justify why a vendor needs to come and fix something that they installed that isn't working quite right.
I love
Um,
that.
on the nurses' side, I've got more. They mentioned how useful having indoor environmental quality measurements for their office was for medications, thinking about what needs to be refrigerated or what might spoil if you leave it out on a really hot day, and having kind of that information. Lots of suggestions around education, both for leadership, the way we described, but then a lot really about including into STEM curriculum for kids. And then creative things like connecting to sustainability goals and connecting indoor air quality with energy consumption of buildings, etc. So those were some ideas that came from this amazing team of group of people that give lots of
Yeah.
ideas for lots of work.
Yeah, it's a great read. And the thing about your paper too is it's not that long. Anybody could get a hold of it and read it. And actually, we will share the link with our listeners so that they can check that out. Dr. Botana, talk to us about some of the limitations and solutions for school districts to understand and act on IEQ data.
Yes, I think that we already have been touching on some, but I think that I really want to emphasize that the data size and the complexity from these sensors is really important. One of the participants on operations was saying, I look at this data and I feel like going to a restaurant with a menu that has way too many options. I feel overwhelmed. And so also saying, the data is interesting, we believe it's accurate, but what is the story behind? How do we turn it into a story? So that really speaks about the lack of data literacy expertise, which is normal. Again, the school staff traditionally have not been trained on data science. And so being able to making inferences from the data is a potential, but you have to know how to do it. And so they were discussing how it will be good to have in-house experts, but they don't have any. In fact, they were telling me, well, we may have one or two persons in a school that knows a lot about data and they could do that, but that's not part of their job right now. So, like redefining also roles could be helpful. And then there is the lack of indoor environmental standards, which is not a limitation, well, it's a limitation to act on the data because you may see levels of things and feel that this is not right and look at papers and say, yeah, this is we should improve this, but there is not a standard to act on it. So
Yeah.
all these pieces are kind of are barriers to acting on the data. But on the bucket of solutions, what we are hearing is that some of the school districts are getting help to make sense of the data from the sensors provider. So these providers are offering schools trainings. They are also developing tools to summarize and visualize data. And they are doing that by listening to their clients and how to shape these tools. And then the other approach is the academic research partners, which I'll say that they not only bring the data science, but they also bring the environmental health lens and also the equity lens. And I think this works pretty well, but what we were discussing before is that on the long term, there may be a mismatch of needs because what the school need maybe is a really simple or repetitive analysis, while academic may need something that is novel to secure funding, to make it publishable. But I believe there are ways to find common ground.
I do
Another,
too. And I think that part of the solution is ASHRAE. They have standards, and though those are, voluntary for schools, and a lot of states have not required these standards, I would love the great minds of ASHRAE and all the folks who volunteer to be on their various committees to start thinking about how to maybe stand up a cottage industry of data analysis for school districts in America. We've got to take a quick commercial break, but when we come back, we have so much more with our researchers from Boston University. So don't go away, folks. There's more Go Green Radio right after this. Hey, everybody, welcome back to Go Green Radio. Dr. Botana, I want to go back to you. I'd love to have you talk more to us about this statement that I found in your paper that reads, participants noted that classroom occupants had a low understanding of how buildings work and how IEQ can impact student health and learning, which led to practices that negatively impacted classroom conditions. And I know that we've talked about some of this, but I really want to underscore this for folks who may not have caught that earlier. What are some of those practices that lead to poor environmental quality in classrooms? And, what are your thoughts on those?
Mhm. Yes, so we hear a lot of conversations about clutter in classrooms. That leads to dust. It's really difficult to clean too, and that will be an irritant to the upper respiratory system, especially for sensitive populations, and then leading to poor air quality. Then also several mentions of teachers bringing their own cleaning products that are not approved by the school, or also bringing some air fresheners, which again, they can irritate the upper respiratory system, and they both contribute to poor air quality. I was mentioning before that they were blocking air vents with decorations, and that again will negatively impact the rate at which fresh air gets replenished. And then there are some schools that are offering portable air purifiers in classrooms, but teachers need to use them for them to be efficient.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I remember one summer when we had interns that for the Go Green initiative, when we used a classroom, it was a portable classroom from a high school science teacher. And in order to keep the temperature right, we had to run the air conditioner. And my voice was gone after several, minutes of trying to work with the interns. That was really hard. And when you have something that's really noisy, teachers are like, come on, I can't shout for 8 hours a day. And so that's where, I'm speaking to the air purifier manufacturers of the world, make them quiet, because that is one of the biggest obstacles that
Yeah.
teachers face. They go home hoarse and with a sore throat every day. I want to switch gears just a little bit, Dr. Botana, because I think Boston Public Schools was really brave. They shared this information publicly. Anybody at any time can go onto their website and see the IEQ data by classroom. Talk to us about some of the benefits and some of the fears that the school districts in your study had about sharing this data publicly.
Yeah, great question. So I feel like the reasoning behind making the data publicly at the classroom level in Boston Public Schools was to enhance transparency about classroom air quality, which was especially important during the COVID pandemic. Now we are, getting into increased heat waves and wildfires, so this is still going to be important. So yeah, on benefits, I think that the transparency, everyone being able to look at the data and feel reassured that conditions are good, even in high pollution events such as wildfires. But of course, there are fears around it. Some people were worried that data could be misunderstood or misinterpreted. If you're looking at a graphic that shows the levels of a certain parameter across the day and suddenly you see a peak, you may worry that this is like something wrong and is in your children's classroom. So, apparently there were several calls from parents asking about daily spikes. And so school staff had to explain that the school district, first of all, has staff monitoring the environmental conditions at all time, and that also short-term spikes are often expected and not necessarily indicate a problem. Other concerns of sharing the data publicly are about thinking about the harm to the school reputation. One participant was mentioning that parents could become upset if they learn that their child classroom has poorer quality than other classrooms in the school or other schools. So we're thinking about inequities, and that will potentially create tension between families and the school leaders. And then there is also hesitancy to even installing the sensors if they are concerned about revealing something for which they don't have the funding to fix. And then we also are affecting the school reputation. So those were, the main concerns. So not barriers, but things to consider carefully.
Well, and they're legitimate. I mean, I don't know a principal in a single school in America that hasn't gotten those angry phone calls for a number of different issues. And so, I think those are really good data points for those of us looking for solutions to be able to help school districts and schools solve. So I really appreciate their candor in telling you what some of these obstacles are. Dr. Fabienne, there's a section in the paper entitled Challenges to Implementing and Operating IEQ Systems in a School District. And some of those challenges include ethical concerns, technical issues, job overload, and a high cost. Tell us more about what the participants in your study had to say about these challenges.
Yeah, I think we've, sort of woven some of this into some of the previous answers, and the high cost of installing with school budgets that are pretty stretched thin, we've discussed the fact that people already are stretched thin in their jobs. They already have a lot that they're doing, and this adds to it. People whose main job is different, right? Keeping kids safe, educating kids, and thinking about whether they need to pivot and add something that wasn't part of their original job description when you install these sensors. Maybe the one that I want to pull on a little more is what they framed as ethical concern, and that is if you find a problem, then and you don't have the resources, what are you going to do? So it's almost kind of like, why look for problems? You know you're going to find them. And then if you don't have resources to deal. So I think I always like what Catherine Walsh says. I've heard her say this at some different conferences. You want to be the person to find it is number one. And I think that that's very true. As a school, if you sort of wait for somebody else outside the school community or outside the school operations staff, that's a big surprise and a big problem that is in line with these comments that Pilar made earlier. So you being the one to find, I think, is important, a school district. But it's, again, really important installing sensors and putting them in classrooms. If that's the solution, that's not a solution. You have to actually pair it with a plan for what you're going to do if you find things. And then resources for what you can do. And And again, we talked about a lot of different solutions, right? Low cost things. Some of them are adjustments in behavior, some of them are education, and some of them are big investments in new mechanical ventilation systems for schools. But there is a whole spectrum. I think that the work that all the different EPA grants, including the one that your organization has, is about offering options, right? An indoor air quality management plan could include monitoring and sensors, but it could be a checklist and an education and doing looking at the state of buildings and seeing where there would be low cost adjustments to make. So I think that I hear all those concerns, I 100% understand them, and I do think that the suite of solutions that these different organizations are offering do offer a path forward at different sort of price points and resources needed.
Absolutely. And we're all leaning into, low or no cost solutions. Sometimes it's just a matter of preventing the air pollutants from coming into the school building. We don't need to spray perfume. We don't need those air fresheners because that is releasing VOCs that if they never enter the space to begin with, we don't have to use expensive technology and machinery to remove it. Dr. Botana, there was a statement in your study that I want to bring out. It said that most of the participants noted that there's a great variability in the indoor environmental quality conditions between schools in their district. And that's often driven by differences in the age of the buildings and aging mechanical systems. And they emphasized how old the school buildings are in their district. Help us understand the nexus between aging buildings and potentially poor indoor environmental quality.
Yes. So as you are saying, US school buildings are old, and that means that their mechanical systems are also old. Not only that, but the buildings were built for a climate that doesn't exist anymore. In some places, like in Boston, heat was not a problem, which is now a problem. And so some schools across the 5 districts included in this study did not have AC at the time of the interviews. But then we know that more than 40% of the public school buildings in US need mechanical ventilation upgrades. And that means that their ventilation systems may be very old, may not work very well, may not have good air filtration or no filtration, may not have air conditioning. On the other hand, the old buildings also are leaky, meaning that through windows and doors and cracks, the polluted air from outside will make it inside the classrooms. And if you don't have a good air ventilation and filtration, that pollution is going to stay inside.
Absolutely.
And so all leads to poorer air quality and too hot conditions in many classrooms. On the other hand, because the schools are old, there is so the school building stock is being replaced with modern facilities, with on-demand ventilation systems and strong air filtration, which is great, but this also increases the disparities in environmental conditions between older and newer buildings that participants were talking about a lot.
Absolutely. And I can say that, we work with primarily low-income school districts with our program. And one of the things that's so difficult is that because most states, school districts have bonding capacity based on their tax base, there's a tremendous amount of disparity between what small rural schools or low-income urban schools can do with their bonding capacity compared to other communities that are more affluent. And without injections of public dollars, they continue to get older and older, the facilities and the mechanical systems, because there isn't bonding capacity that meets the price tag of the solutions. On that, we're going to take a quick commercial break, but don't go away, folks. There's more Go Green Radio right after this. Welcome back to Go Green Radio, everybody. So glad that you could join us. We're talking about indoor air quality in schools, and we are joined by two tremendous researchers from the Boston University School of Public Health. Dr. Fabienne, there's a line in your study that I want to dig into. It says that participants shared their concern about inequities in the distribution of environmental exposures in their district. Two of them explained how schools with poorer IEQ conditions tend to serve low-income families who live in neighborhoods that are overburdened by environmental stressors. Talk to us about what you learned about inequities among various schools in the same school district, and how decisions are being made about which schools to prioritize when funding is available for upgrades.
Yeah, this was a really important point, and I will say that there's a national conversation and thinking about inequities across rural, urban divides, as we were talking earlier about sort of a bonding capacity and ability to raise funds. So there's that kind of national conversation around investments in schools in general in different lower income communities, or again, the rural urban divide is very, very big one. There's been national conversation around air pollution exposure inequities as well, where communities are cited in places that have much higher air pollution, and then arguably then should be the ones to get investments in clean air and ventilation first. So I'm going to leave that at the national level to ponder, and maybe adding the data point that this is partly why we have this $85 billion deficit in deferred maintenance, upgrades that are needed, et cetera, for schools. So maybe a national topic for another time. In terms of within the school district, I do think that having a sensor in every classroom actually helps inform decisions that can reduce disparities in exposures for different pollutants. I liked one thing that one participant said was, you cannot dispute data if presented properly. If you have a sensor in every classroom, the way that Boston Public Schools, Denver, Montgomery County and Boston have, you can actually bring data to say, okay, this is what conditions look like in these classrooms, this is what conditions look like in these schools. One of the papers that we published on CO2, we did these calculations because maybe you don't have as a school district money to put a sensor in every classroom. Well, we did calculations to say, well, if you have a classroom of 200, you can monitor a subset of those to get a sense of to get like a distribution of a snapshot of what the indoor air quality is. So you don't have to have a sensor in each classroom to be able to bring data into a conversation, or to incorporate what you learn about schools across the school district as another data point in how schools might decide to invest. And as you know, it's really complicated, right? Like investments are driven by so many different things. I do think indoor air quality is another piece that can be incorporated.
Well, and I'm going to say it very plain spoken. Sometimes, districts make decisions based on the squeaky wheel. Who has the most number of angry parents showing up to every school board meeting wanting the tax dollars and the bond dollars going to their kids' school, whether or not it's the school in the district with the most need. And so using this data to show that, investments can be made in the schools within the district that have the most inequitable conditions takes a lot of bravery and courage, but it's the right thing to do. Dr. Botana, connecting IEQ data with energy and utility information can support efforts to lower energy use and redirect those cost savings towards school improvements. That was one of the statements in your study. Tell us more about this particular motivator for school districts to take action on indoor environmental quality.
Yes. So school staff in building operations focusing on sustainability, they are driven by energy efficiency. So what they're thinking is, if we can link our systems with what is happening inside the classrooms, the indoor environmental quality, we can make adjustments automatically in ways that our systems are only working really hard when necessary and working little when not needed. So that will potentially lead to reducing energy bill cost also greenhouse emissions, and those savings can be redirected for other improvements. So I think this is
Absolutely.
a nice motivator that is not strictly thinking about health, although health is impacted after all.
Sure, but it's okay to have multiple motivators, and if saving money that can be redirected towards other purposes is one of them, I'm okay with that. Dr. Fabienne, there's a statement in the study that I want to highlight. It says, all school districts that were included in this study are large with centralized building operations systems, for which installing IEQ monitoring networks has made building operations and environmental services more efficient. However, this gain may not incentivize smaller schools with less complex operations. So my question is, for organizations that might be working with individual schools versus school districts to try and enact IEQ management plans, what are the implications of this finding?
Well, one implication is that we need to talk to smaller school districts and see what could work. But another one is that I think we can learn a lot from these bigger initiatives from these large school districts that are centralized and have resources, and then parse out what could work for schools that don't have all of that infrastructure in place. It's been wonderful to be part of this schools and indoor air quality community and see the how open everybody is to sharing lessons learned, good and bad. Sort of this works, this doesn't work. I think it's lowered these school districts, these 5 pioneering ones very specifically, being out there and being vocal and sharing, have really lowered the barrier for a lot of other schools around the country and around the world to be able to say, well, what can I do? Maybe I can't do that, but I can do this piece. So that's, I think, one thing. The second is that there's sort of that work that the school districts to install and share lessons learned. And then there's all the work in the middle of translating all those lessons in different ways for different audiences. And this is where, again, sort of going back to the EPA grants that funded your organization, the American Lung Association, Center for Green Schools, and others, a big piece of that is saying, okay, let's take everything that we've learned and turn it into information and resources that others can use without maybe having to make this investment. And the other initiative I'll mention is the Global Pledge for Healthy Indoor Air that the Air Club is behind on thinking about policies and sharing sort of policies and action plans in place that others can also kind of take and move forward from around the world. This is kind of more of a worldview.
Absolutely. We've got just a minute or so left. Dr. Botana, in the final moments that we have left in the show, what parting thoughts would you like to leave with our listeners and viewers?
So I will say invest in improving school indoor environments, surprisingly, because this is a foundational time for students. If students don't feel good, their learning is going to suffer. And I also would like people to think about installing monitors in classrooms, like something that if you cannot measure something, if you measure something, you have information to act on it. So if you think about going to the doctor, they will, and you have an annual physical, they'll get you some tests done, even if you feel good, and there could be something. So based on the test results, the doctor will recommend you like a change in diet or lifestyle, and kind of the same thing goes for school buildings. So just having this
Well
metaphor so
said.
that people can think about installing monitors in schools as a cause.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Botana and Dr. Fabienne, for being with us. And thank you to all of our viewers and our listeners for being with us as well. We'll be here same time, same place next week with more Go Green Radio. Until then, have a wonderful week and do something in your life to go green.